Hello and welcome to Grief Seeds, a podcast where you'll find insights, reframings, metaphors, and visualizations, all known as grief seeds, to help you cultivate growth and healing in your life after loss. My name is Shelby Forsythia. I'm an intuitive grief guide and author, and on this show, I'll share insights from my interactions with clients, wise words from fellow grievers, and personal stories from my own life, with the hope that they transform your grief as they have transformed mine. Because even when it doesn't feel like it, we are planting the seeds of growth in the midst of great pain and heartache. Your grief is welcome here. Hi there, grief growers, and welcome to another episode of Grief Seeds. Today I want to challenge you to call yourself a student of grief. And this is a Shelby Forsythia original. I came up with this idea shortly after the death of my mother, probably about 2-3 years after her death, because I found myself relentlessly pursuing information about grief and loss. I had recently moved to Chicago after her death and got a library card for the first time as an adult and would scour the shelves for books, for memoirs, for self-help guides, for any kind of research into what grief was, what it meant, how I could fit it into the experience of my life. And as I read these books, as I did some of the exercises in them, as I listened to podcasts, as I found my own sort of community in the midst of grief, I had this sense that, or almost a sense of deja vu, that I was really closely connected to the person I had been in college. And now I kind of had the parallel experience of my mom dying when I was 21 in my senior year of college. So I was not too far off from, timeline-wise, the experience of being in college and then the experience of studying and pursuing information after her death. But there was a moment where I sat down in my apartment and I was like, this learning, this pursuit of knowledge, this community gathering, it feels a lot like being in school. And in that moment, although I didn't necessarily feel it in the moment, there was some kind of subtle shift happening towards learning from grief, as opposed to seeing grief as this immense and inescapable burden or weight that was pressed on top of me. It was a reframe that I started to use out loud with other people. I would introduce myself as somebody who worked in the grief space, and I said, I'm Shelby Forsythia, and I'm a student of grief. They'd say, oh, what does that mean? And I would look at them and I'd smile. I'd say, well, grief is perpetually my teacher. It is always telling me something about the experience of what it means to lose, of what it means to live, of what it means to die, and of what it means to be human on the earth and have this experience of loss. So I challenge you in today's episode to call yourself a student of grief. Something that this phrase can grant you is freedom from just grief as this impenetrable or immovable burden or heap of pain that just sits on or lives on top of you all the time and presses on you with this force, with this momentum, with this, despair. Yeah, despair. God, to treat grief like a thing that is alive, like a teacher, like a espouser of lessons. Maybe not a teacher you like. You don't have to like this teacher. This could be your least favorite professor in the entire world. So this is not an episode encouraging you to enjoy the process of being taught by grief, but it can change this experience that you're having for relentless pursuit of information in life after loss, of where do I go from here? What does this all mean? Why does grief happen at all? How does the experience of death fit into my life? This relentless question asking, it can turn it from this place or this experience of powerlessness into this seat or this posture of being taught. by grief, by looking at grief or by looking at yourself as a griever, however you'd like to see it, and saying, my job now is to be a student of this experience. When you're Googling how to sleep again after loss, you are not desperately searching for answers. You are a student of grief. When you are seeking out community, wherever you are in the world or wherever you are online, or whatever your loss may be, you are not anxious and hustling in the midst of great isolation and loneliness. You are looking for cohorts, student companions along this path of loss, people who are learning from the same syllabus as you are, for lack of better phrasing. Yes, this reframing of being a student of grief can allow you to always be gathering information and allow that information gathering to be okay. I think sometimes our friends and family look at us and say, you're still reading books about grief. You're still going to that support group. You're still wondering what this all means and you haven't moved on yet. You're like, yes, I am a perpetual student of this experience. Grief goes on, so does my study as well. And it also, one more thing that the experience of being a student of grief can help you with, and this is a biggie, so deep breath before we dive in here, is it frees you from the weight of trying to solve grief. In studying something and learning about something, you're not always looking for the end of information. You are simply looking for more information about a topic or about an experience or about a subject. So in being a student of grief, if you are perpetually a student of grief, you can release that obligation or that pressure to have whatever you find, whatever piece of information you stumble upon, be the answer or the solution or the fix or the cure for your grief. Instead, it is another lesson that you're learning. It's another day of class. And yes, there can be a kind of a despair or a monotony in the Groundhog Day of every day I wake up and I learn something about grief. And also, in allowing yourself to be a student of grief, you free yourself from this obligation to solve it. And it moves grief from a problem to be solved to a lifelong school, a lifelong academy, a lifelong classroom, where it is always teaching me something and I am always learning at its feet. Again, whether or not I like the class or the professor, that's up to you. That's not something I can determine for you, whether or not you like the class or the lessons that you're learning. That's a different story altogether, but treating grief and your experience within grief as lessons, as study, as quests for information, as opposed to racing to find an answer, hurrying to try to get to the end of this thing. It allows grief to be endless. And it allows you as a student to deepen in your growth and expand inside of it. So please join me in taking a deep breath here. And out. Wherever you are in your grief, 2 months, 20 years, and whatever your loss experience is, may you be willing to become a student of it. May you allow it to teach you things that you didn't know about your life, about itself, the experience of grief, about love, about pain, about other people, about empathy, and about humanity. May you wake up in the morning willing to know what's next, to learn what's next. And in your pursuit of information and community and knowledge and answers, may you release yourself from the pressure to find the thing that will save you, and instead see your grief experience as a place to constantly learn, grow, evolve, expand, ask more questions. God, you are so free to ask more questions. And even to rest in between classes, in between periods of study. May you find your cohort of students who have experienced the loss that you faced, or who are asking the same questions that you are asking, and may you allow the lessons that grief teaches you or imparts upon you to deepen your experience as a human on this earth. Deep breath in here and out. Thank you so much for joining me on Grief Seeds today. So that's all for this episode of Grief Seeds. Thank you so much for listening today. You can find additional grief support at shelbyforsythia.com or by following me on social media at shelbyforsythia on Facebook and Instagram. If this podcast helped you in your life after loss, please leave a review and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And be sure to share Grief Seeds with a friend, because you never know what someone you love is going through. A huge thank you to my Patreon supporters for financially keeping this podcast on the air. If you'd like to support Grief Seeds on Patreon through a yearly or monthly pledge, you can do so at patreon.com/shelbyforsythia. My Patreon supporters get access to behind-the-scenes content, including a once-a-month grief support call with me and 5 90-minute workshops with topics decided by grievers themselves. Again, that website is patreon.com/shelbyforsythia. Music for Grief Seeds is performed by Addie Goldstein. As always, my dear grief growers, it was beautiful sharing this space and time with you today. I see you. I am so proud of you and the work that you're doing in the world, and I love you. Because even through grief, we are growing.